Oh, she's wearing red lipstick. Oh, she's serious. And I am serious. I'm very serious. I come to you today with my red lipstick on, and that can only mean one thing. Today's topic is very serious. Very near and dear to my heart. As a weird girl myself, I've been weird for 22 years. Since March 15, 2003. I've been weird. And every year I get better at being weird, and I become more comfortable with being weird. But few times do I find a book that's as weird as me, because most of the time, book characters are normal, and they have to be to carry a narrative. But some books, some plot arches, some devices that authors use are just so strange. And I was reading The Tropic of Cancer, which is one of the books I'm going to talk about today, recently. And I was like, what are some other books like this that I've read that don't really play by the rules of literature? They don't really fit into any genre. They don't follow a traditional plot and climax pattern. They're just weird. And that's so interesting to me now that I'm writing more myself, reading and wondering, how did you think of this? Like, how do you construct a story like this? And I just want to give you guys some of my recommendations of my favorite weird books, because there's a lot of normal books out there. There's a lot of contemporary romance, a lot of fantasy, but there's very few weird books. I guess you'll understand what I mean by weird the more I talk about these books, but they all have one thing in common, and that's that, excuse me, my associate is at the door. So what all these books have in common is that they don't follow the traditional plot structure, don't have typical characters, and they are in some way different than most things I've read, in a way that they stand out, even though I haven't read all of them recently. Some of them I read years ago, but they just really stayed with me. Say hello. Say, I'm the weird cat, and I climb the curtains. Okay, she's biting my finger. Okay, we're gonna start from most recently. The weirdest book I read is called Piranesi. I didn't know about Piranesi until one time I went to the library just looking for something interesting, and I saw Piranesi sitting there, and I just looked it up on Goodreads quickly on my phone, and it had good reviews, so I picked it up. When I started reading it, I was like, whoa. It takes place in a liminal space. And now that I've studied Kristeva, I actually know what liminal spaces are. It's another world, but it exists in the form of a house with no entrance and no exit and no ending. And it's just this endless house. And the bottom floors have the sea in them. There's tides, there's areas with water where you can fish. And our main character, Piranesi, through whose journal entries we're experiencing the story, is the only resident and the caretaker of the house. The only thing in the house, other than some wildlife and Piranesi and the water, are statues. Strange, huge, tiny statues of people, animals, wildlife, plants, mythical creatures, and all of them are being cataloged by him. He's very familiar with the house, he loves living in the house, and he's frequently visited by another person who's the other, because in this world there's only himself and the other. And everything he knows is kind of through the lens of what he's experienced in the house and his surroundings, which are the sculptures and the animals. He fishes, he feeds himself. If he needs shoes or something, the other brings them for him. The other provides him with pens and journals, and that's his life, and he loves it. But soon things start to seem a bit awry as more people who are not himself and the other begin to appear in the house, and he starts to read his own old journal entries, and it starts to kind of fall apart and unravel, and it turns into a sort of academia mystery. I would compare it most directly to The Secret History. That's the most direct comparison. But it also reminded me a lot of Ninth House and also Calabasas, R.F. Kuang's new book. I haven't read it, but I know that it's a similar thing about an academia setting and entering a different world through study. But it's super similar to Ninth House, which is again the coexistence of magic and higher education and place where they intersect, and how higher education grants you access to these different worlds and magic. But the thing is, you don't realize that this is the plot until halfway into the book, and you're spending half your time in this book just reading journal entries from the lens of somebody who knows so little. And the voice of the character is so earnest and incredibly well done and believable, and random words are capitalized, and she uses this prose style that really convinces you that this person only knows what's immediately around them. And I found myself wondering, doesn't he ever think where have I come from, when did I get here, how long have I been here. But when you read it, you don't really wonder it yourself because you become as convinced as him. And then when this worldview starts to become threatened and Piranesi starts to doubt himself and cross-reference his old journals and wonder about what actually is happening, the pieces of how this happened and where it will end start to come together. I was almost kind of sad because I was really enjoying the mythical world of the house and what living in it was like, and just this mundane but simultaneously mystical self-sustaining life that he lives in the house. I've just never read another book like that. Even Ninth House, even though it is similar in that it's like access to other worlds through education and also The Secret History, of course, everyone's read that. Super similar vibes, but not in the same style at all, because these stories, Ninth House and A Secret History, both follow a very specific plot structure where something happens and then there's a reasoning and there's characters and there's a build up and we know the characters. But here, things have happened and we're kind of tracing the steps back through Piranesi's journal entries, and it's just incredible. It's so vivid and interesting, and the things that are happening and the statues you're seeing are clearly reference to something else. And some people who come into Piranesi's life are referring to the house as a labyrinth. All these symbols and illusions that keep coming up in the book through Piranesi's writing, his interactions, and the house itself, it asks you for a lot of patience. It's kind of like solving a puzzle because you start from the middle with a character who's very happy living in ignorance. At some point you also become happy with it, but then you become forced to solve the puzzle with him, and it took me some time to get into it, but I knew that the payoff would be worth it. Just really exemplary work and something so different than anything I've ever read. It doesn't have a typical build, climax, and resolution. That's not how it plays out. Start in the middle, you work your way back. Just the narrative style is something completely unique and different to this book, and I really highly recommend it. Not to everybody. I would recommend it maybe to, if you're up for a challenge, it's not a difficult book, but it's not a typical book, so you have to be kind of prepared for that going into it. I was really impressed. I really loved it, and I didn't want it to end. Now that I'm writing my own book, as I was reading it, I kept thinking to myself, like, how did she write like this? How do you see this character? He's in a labyrinth and he doesn't know anything outside of it. So to even narrate his day-to-day activities, which words he's using and how he describes things is limited. Where's his vocabulary coming from? It's contained. So to even write from the point of view of such a character is such a skill, and it's just a masterclass. Like, I really recommend it if you're into writing and if you're into reading complex, challenging books. Yeah, really great book, but weird. Definitely weird. The next book I read for university, it's called The Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller, and it's a very, very unique book because basically it's telling the life of a bohemian American artist type who's living in France during the I don't know. And when we would discuss this book in class, a lot of people got angry at it because it's so vulgar and misogynistic and derogatory, and it's quite abrasive from the books we're used to reading now. And even I, after the first 15 pages, I was like, this is just a lot. I didn't get angry at it because there's no point in being angry at a dead man. I felt more put off because there's very vulgar descriptions of sex, disease, filth, dirt, hunger, and just a lot of what we imagine Paris in that era to be. But at the same time, this is a book that doesn't follow chronology. One passage flows into the next, and the next thing is happening a few days later, and then you're bouncing back into a flashback. It's really a stream of consciousness book, and it's taking place in the voice of a character who is succinctly unlikable. But again, you can't be angry with that, in my opinion, because that's exactly what Miller is trying to do. This is a semi-autobiographical book. It's obviously about his own experiences, but with some embellishments, and the main character in the book is Henry Miller. It's him writing his experience. There will be just an insane description of how he slept with a woman and what he thought of her and her parts, but followed by a beautiful piece of prose describing something, describing a street, describing the snow, and it's just so perfect and lively. And the structure of the story is not chronological. There's no character arc, there's no happy ending. He just narrates his life, how it's happening real time. And what especially shocked me about this book is just how kind of relatable the narrative structure is in that way, because he'll be at dinner with somebody and the order in which he observes things, notices things, says things, what people say to him, connects backstories in his head is exactly the way it would play out in real life. You'll be like, oh, there's a piece of chicken. They always cook chicken because it's cheap. But then this guy, he also had this thing happen to him where I lent him money and he stole money, whatever, whatever. And it just flows. And I cannot understand how someone could write in this way, how someone could put literally what it's like to have a thought into paper, into words. Sorry guys, apparently my entire family needs to have a conversation exactly when I start filming. And I don't agree with the book being bad just because the character who's narrating it is a bad guy. I think that if you think that, then you've missed the point, because obviously Miller wrote it wanting to sound like a bad guy. That's all very intentional, and I think he does it well. I can't speak to his character, but I think that the book is a success in what it set out to do. He also pulls a bit of a Proust in that he's referencing writing a book in the book, and the book that he's writing is the book that we're reading, which is always fun little inception moment. The reviews on this book are very mixed. Some people think it's the greatest book ever written, and some people think it's just a man saying sexually explicit things to elicit shock in the 1920s. I think in a sense this man has kind of freed himself of the shackles of ordinary life, kind of reflecting the way the prose is taking place in a non-chronological order. He doesn't have goals, aspirations. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't have an income. He doesn't even really have a house. He doesn't have family. He's living every second in survival. When he wants food, he finds a way to get it. When he wants to have sex, he finds a way to get it. And it's kind of, when you strip back humanity to that barest form of itself, without conventions of society and work and propriety, especially back then, you kind of see a different side of man, and that can be hard to look at. It can be hard to understand or empathize with. But I think that for an author to be able to do that is very impressive. And for me, I would cite this book as a book that changed my life, not because it opened my eyes to anything, except that it made me realize that books don't need to be anything. Books can be everything. And just the way a book flows and the way they're meant to be written and the kind of content you can have in a book really is limitless. And this is a very early example of what that can look like. And I was very impressed by Miller's voice in this book. And I think that it's a very, I understand why it was banned, but I don't think that it should be now. And I think everyone should read banned books. And I do think if you are a writer or somebody who kind of has been reading the same thing, I was very much in a fantasy thing. I was reading Throne of Glass. I'd read 7 books with kind of the same plot happening, and I loved it. But to see something that completely defies that tears it apart and puts it back together, that strips it back, it's important to have a well-rounded understanding of literature and the world. So yeah, I recommend that weird book. The next book I'm going to talk about, I didn't like as much, and that was Wicked. I read Wicked just because the movie was coming out. I watched the movie and I was like, I want to know more about this. And a lot of people were making TikToks at the time about the way the musical is different than the book. And so I was just interested. It was a very current topic. So I started at the library and I was like, hey, why not? So I issued it. I didn't really like it, not because it failed to do what it set out to do, but the way that it's constructed is just not fun to read. It slows down in the wrong places and speeds up in the wrong places. And the characters' childhoods are extremely detailed, and suddenly we're 20 years in the future. I don't really enjoy the dialogue. I don't really root for any character, which, like I said, in Miller's case works, but I don't think it necessarily worked here. So I didn't like this book, but I can still respect it for what it is, and that's weird in the sense that there's not many books in this way that talk about an entire society, a fictional society, as a microcosm of our society, and the politics, the fact that one race of people is being pushed out and their lands are basically being fracked, and how some races are better and some are not, and how very simple discrimination, someone's green and everyone else isn't. It can explain and elaborate so many complicated ideas. And I think it's an admirable goal. And that's why I would class this as a successfully weird book, because it has a very aspirational and complex goal that it maybe doesn't successfully achieve. But I don't think I've read any other book that sets out to do this in this way, this realistically and at this scale. The place where it falls short is characterization. And unfortunately in books, characters are often the vessel for the story. So even if the politics are complicated and reflective and they make you think, and you know, it's contemplating real life problems with race and geopolitics and things like that, especially in Oz, if it's being carried out by characters with unconvincing personalities that you don't really care about or like, it's a complicated thing to undertake. Every character is kind of a bad person, and that it might be realistic, but it makes it difficult to believe them, to trust them as narrators, and it's a complicated thing to explain. The author writes in great detail about a college friend group and a friendship forming, but it has no payoff in the end, because in the end it's just Elphaba versus Glinda. I did think it was interesting how stripped back the musical is. It's hard to imagine that this is the source material for Wicked, because where this is going and the way it takes place is so different than the extremely simplified, stripped back version that Wicked does, the musical. So I was trying to picture, like, if I read this and I had to make a musical out of it, would I have done it the way Wicked did? I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would have even read this book and thought, oh, let's do a musical. Because the musical is so pink and green, opposite sisters, friends, whatever. But in this book, Glinda's not much of a character. It's all about Elphaba, and the contrast between them isn't so stark. They are colleagues, they're comrades, they are working and studying together. It's interesting. Like, looking at it after watching the movie, it's a very different piece of work. Maybe it's a case of biting off more than you can chew, because when your characters aren't equipped to take on the scale of society and politics that you want to talk about in this way, in a fictional world, through examples from their society, it can be too much for them to handle, and it can be too little payoff for the reader. Some things are over-explained and some things are too vague, but it's also just interesting to see where a Broadway musical can come out of a book about political satire in a completely different tone and voice. It's kind of disappointing how much Wicked the musical strips back what it could have been, but it's not like Gregory Maguire did a better job of elaborating enough on what he set out to do, in my opinion. Oz and Munchkin Land and Winky Country are not beautiful mystical lands. They're places with real people, with real resentment, with politics, with stories, and it's really eye-opening to read about, and it's a refreshing take on a fantasy angle. But at the same time, I don't think that this author did it successfully. With that being said, though, if you are a fan of the musical, I would recommend reading the book. If you're into politics and reading that kind of thing, it's an interesting satire, perhaps oversimplified satire in certain ways. I would not recommend this one, actually, now that I think about it, now that I really think about how it flowed. It's a book that's successfully weird, but it doesn't necessarily succeed in what the author set out to do. And you can tell that his own thoughts and biases are coming through in the book, but I'm not sure this was the way to do it. I don't know. Like, it's just not great literally to me. With personal stories as well as politics being involved, you have to be super careful about equal attention to all aspects, and that's the biggest thing that's succinctly missing in this book. The next weird book, the last one for today that I'm going to talk about, is My Year of Rest and Relaxation. This book was super viral. Everybody was reading it, and it was social media famous, just I think because of its weirdness. I read it a few years ago. Yeah, I mean, I think the reason it became so popular is because it's so unusual from other books. I saw a lot of reviews when it was viral of people being like, this book has no plot. It has no plot, but I was still hooked. And to me, that's what I'm classing as weird books today. Not a typical plot at all. My Year of Rest and Relaxation is a story of a girl who is rich, has an apartment in New York. Her parents pay for her to go to grad school. She has a good high-paying job, but she wants to take a year away from the world, off from real life, and just sleep. She very carefully plans this endeavor. She empties her apartment of things. She creates a very specific cocktail of drugs that makes her sleep for 3 days at a stretch. She plans her nourishment and self-care that she needs to do to survive in between these bouts of long sleep. And for a year, she just wants to sleep. She's just sick of the world and she wants to withdraw from it. And that is a very fundamental premise of human life, is the desire to sometimes want to escape it all, escape the pain and death and humiliation and difficulty of it all, and just sleep. And this is kind of a woman experimenting with herself of how far can this go? What will I come out as if I don't have to experience anything for an entire year? I think it's a smart choice for the character to be a privileged, advantaged white woman who's had everything go well for her. It would be more relatable, obviously, if it was an average, you know, person whose life is hard and who wants to escape it. But this woman's life is easy. She has a job, she has an apartment, she has parents who pay for her, she's blonde, pretty, white, thin, and she still can't hang. She still can't handle it and she wants to sleep it all off. What finally causes her to exit this daze is when the year deadline is up. She begins to go outside and notice nature and beauty, and she realizes, oh, there's more to life. Typical my depression's cured thing. This is happening in 2000. When 9/11 happens, she sees someone she knows, her friend, who comes in to check up on her frequently, jump off the burning building. And that is kind of something that sparks her to return to normalcy. And that tells her, okay, this year of being in hibernation is up. That's cheesy boots. I'm not gonna lie, guys. That's cheesy boots. This book is weird because the premise is weird. It's a book about somebody who's sleeping for an entire year. An entire 200-page book about somebody who's sleeping. And it's an interesting, detailed account of depression. That's what makes it weird. That doesn't make it good. I don't really like that ending. I think that it was too... I was kind of shocked by how cheesy it was, because I don't know, like, you write a book about a detailed description of depression and you're writing about this woman who has everything but still is choosing to escape it all, and you choose to end it with the most cheesiest possible outcome. The premise is super relatable, with the narrator wanting to shed off her old self and kind of understand what she is without wants, needs, and desires. She's in a position where she can take a year off life and do that. But in the end, when she is in this hibernation, she can't really escape what's happened to her. That those things, her relationship with her family, an ex-partner, all these things leave a trace and they keep coming back to her as she's sleeping. And I'm not sure what it says on a mental health level to describe depression in this way of like, I just rested it off and now I'm reborn without doing the work. Because as somebody who has depression, I will say it's work. It's a choice. It's not, you cannot sleep it off. And of course, I don't think that this book is meant to be a how-to guide or an advocacy piece at all. But I just don't know what it means on a meta scale for this person to sleep it off without actually working through things and freeing herself of things that way, which is a route that she could have gone down. But by being locked in an apartment for a year with this character who's in sleep, in rest, going into the deepest, darkest parts of herself and shedding them and coming back to life slowly, you kind of, as a reader, enter with an unlikable rich character who you don't care about, who you're like, well, she deserves that because she's so advantaged and she's so privileged. And you come out kind of liking her and wanting the best for her, which is, I think, very successful character work. Not easy to do. I won't say that this novel ends optimistically. It's more like she realizes her sleep has done its job and she's now aware of things again and she wants to feel things again. But I don't know, it's just so cheesy. But it's just a weird book. I mean, just reading about... What I liked most about it was the 2000s of it. I loved reading about a New York apartment. It was interesting to read about how she justifies this plan, how she prepares everything in her life around this plan. She kind of like quits her job and she arranges food to be delivered and she arranges the drugs to come in at certain times, and the thought and intention behind it is what make it interesting and weird for me. The narrative style is weird, of course, because you're reading Sleeping Beauty, but instead of the prince going to rescue the princess, you're the princess who's sleeping for 100 years. Learning about her life through these flashbacks and stuff, it doesn't take a traditional structure again, which made it strange, but I'm not sure I really liked it. I read it and I found it hard to put down and I was going through it, but I'm not sure it stuck with me for very long because of the cop-out ending, in my opinion. That's my year of rest and relaxation. I hope I've given you some weird book recommendations. I think it's always good to throw in a weird book once a month, maybe, to switch it up, read a different narrative structure, because I think it makes us better critics, better readers, and hopefully better writers as well, when we try something different, when we push ourselves a little bit. And I hope this video was fun for you guys to watch, and now I'm gonna go finish reading another weird book.